Hi, I'm here today with Michael Duty, and this is a treat for me because actually he's going to be our first male author on I'm sorry, I'm just blubbering all over the place here. He's going to be our first male author on this podcast. So I'm excited to talk to him a little bit about his book, Canaan Found, and to find out more about him. So I'm going to leave it over to Michael and let him just tell a little bit about himself and his family. Welcome, Michael. I'm just thrilled to have you here today.
Nice to be here. Nice to be with you, Jennifer.
So tell us a little bit about you and your family, and just give us a little brief history of who you are.
Well, I suppose I'm like most people. I'm more than one person. Professionally, I've been an architect all my life, practicing architecture all the way from Boston, where I started, all the way back to New Mexico, where I had come from my high school days. So I went from New Mexico to college, then I went to Boston, then I ended up coming back. My wife and I have lived in, we've lived in all of those places, and I practiced architecture in Santa Fe, New Mexico, after I returned from Boston, and I've been there for the last, I was there about 40 years, and I built my own firm, and we had a thriving practice, and in 1916 or so, I decided that I would like to leave New Mexico and come out I had kind of discovered the South, and so we visited often, and we ended up coming out to Greenville, South Carolina, where we have started what's sort of a new adventure. And in the process, I did a little architecture. I did practice architecture here in Greenville for 2 or 3 years before I finally retired. And so I've been retired since, I guess 2019. In addition to being an architect, I've always been a bit of a wilderness Western aficionado, and all of my stay in New Mexico was in Santa Fe. Santa Fe was sort of the place where we kept our stuff, but all of my free time I was in the wilderness, leading people into the wilderness, doing backpacking and horsepacking, and guiding for hunts. I wasn't a hunter, but I would guide for some hunts, and I would go in, and just everything about the wilderness I enjoyed, and my wife enjoyed, and we did it together, and it went on for about 30 years. And during the process, I also spent a great deal of time riding and doing some cowboying. I can't say that I was a cowboy, because a cowboy is somebody that earns his living on a horseback. And I may have spent many years on a horseback doing cowboy things, but I don't claim the title of cowboy, but I certainly claim an understanding of the lifestyle of the West and the work involved in running a ranch and running cattle. So I had that experience. I've also, on another level, been a storyteller. Humor, stories that illustrate things of that nature, and they've always been of given me a great sense of joy to tell stories to people, and especially stories that could be brought to bear on subjects at hand. I got a chance to practice that in my architectural practice, because I guess I used to take the opportunity as I worked with clients to regale them with stories of other people and how they dealt with situations that might have come up, and it was quite a joy. I began writing really probably 15 years ago, and I started several stories and books, but I really wasn't thinking about being published. I was just telling stories on paper. My real writing career began with my first book, which was called Egg Crate Beginnings, and it's a nonfiction book, and it was a bit of a journal of my life. And I had started it before just to tell my story. Not that my story was tremendously unique, but I think it's important for everybody to record their story for their family at the very least, and perhaps for others that might find interesting. But it really got a kickstart. It really got started good when I realized that the framework that I could put it in that might most appeal to me as I structured my view of the past was to speak openly of how the Lord had influenced me in my life from really from the first grade forward, I have vivid events and memories and times when I felt um, strongly influenced, intervened, whatever. I don't know what the right word is, but I've always felt that the Lord had a role in my life. So I began writing my first book as a story of my story, and that was fun. I recommend journaling to anyone. I
Yeah.
had no mind of creating a bestseller. But when I finished it, I discovered I got it published quite easily. I found a publisher that was interested in publishing it, so they published it. I didn't market it or do anything of that nature. It was just my first foray. And then after after that book, I had other stories in my mind, and again with the idea that the role of the Lord in our life and varied ways that it can assert itself was of primary interest. So I entered the world of fiction to to create characters, and I had a wealth of characters in my own experience to draw from as inspiration. And I wanted to tell a story of a simple person that walked in the presence of God. It's not a theological book, I don't believe, in the sense that there's any scripture quoted or any instruction given, but it's a vignette, I suppose. I like that word. It's a vignette, a long vignette of how the Lord works through people's lives, especially in my main character. And so I created a story in which a cowboy working in northern New Mexico and southern Colorado all his life had grown up in the wilderness and grown up on horse and grown up working ranches and loving every minute of it. And how he came to a door was open for him where he had inherited a farm back in the Ozarks, which was in Arkansas, which was where he had come from, where he had been born and where he had spent many summers. So he found himself pulled to go back, certainly to check out the farm. And he also found himself being invited to a class reunion and things of that nature. So he finally loaded up his truck and his horse, and he went back to the Ozarks to see what there was. In the process, he discovered that, yes, he had an inheritance, and it was a nice farm from a deceased uncle that he had been very close to. And he also discovered that with it came a certain responsibility to set the record straight on a murder that had occurred back in the 40s.
So there's your conflict coming in, your mystery.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a story on about 4 levels. I mean, on the one level, there's his dealing with the farm and with the responsibility that his uncle left him for sort of creating a restitution for a murder that had occurred back in 1944. At the same time, he reacquainted with his best friend, and well, I say reacquainted. He had spent much time with his best friend over the years, who also reside in Arkansas, and they relived their past, and they have quite a colorful relationship. He also connected with many other friends. And another level of the story was while he had been a man that walked in the presence of God, he had never been a particularly strong churchgoer, and he had never found a church home. He was a little bit nonplussed in that area, let's say. And he discovered through some of his family connections, his sister back in Arkansas, he discovered a little church that finally appealed to him. And it's a story of how that church why it appealed to him, and how he found a bit of a church home. And then another level on the story is he reacquainted with a long lost love that had never been realized.
I was going to say, for all the women out there, is there a little romance in your book? Because that's important to women, you know. There's
quite a romance story in the book, because it's a young lady who they were very close when they were in high school and got separated, and had done nothing for really nigh on to 50 some odd years. And here it was, they were running into each other, and not only discovered that they were running into each other, but maybe there was a method behind the madness of of why it was happening, and they rekindle their relationship, and it's quite, I think, touching and funny and positive, and something that I think we can all relate to with our present loves or our past loves that we might have enjoyed. And it's another part of the story. So all these things kind of conspire together to move along and to support each other in terms of showing another little vignette, another little window, another little glimpse of how the presence of the Lord works in our life and how he opens doors and how we choose to go through them. Sometimes reluctantly and sometimes aggressively.
Your character, your main character, about what is his age about? Because I'm guessing he's a little older. He's not a young man.
Well, let's see. He's about, and he's around 50. I'd have to look up the notes. He's around 52, I think.
Okay. Because you said something about they hadn't seen each other since he was for 50 years and they were in high school together. So I was trying to do the math in my head, and that comes to being a little bit older. So I didn't know.
No, actually they met, yes, the book is set in 2016.
Okay.
And he graduated in 76. So he had 40 years,
okay.
Right? And then so that would make him around 57 or 58 years old.
Okay. Just
actually, yeah.
I like to, people like to know, not that it really matters, but I find that people like to have a connection with an age. And I think you have somebody who's got a little more years under his belt. It's going to draw more people, maybe my age, than somebody who's in their 20s or 30s,
Yes, he's a confident, accomplished, but quiet man that is very open in his attitudes, and he has a certain dedication, especially to truth and to compassionate relationships and all the things these mean. He's a little bit out of touch with modern technology, and there's a lot of humor in the book where he discovers that he has to get a cell phone, for instance, and so I think there's something to relate for people in that age as we try to grapple with all the quick changes that come about in our life. And he does a very good job of it. And his story is, I set the story in Arkansas because I personally was born in that town, and I wanted to, it's not about the town per se, but I wanted a setting that was realistic and that I could relate to and make sense of. And so there's a lot, it's all fictitious, but it's also reminiscent of things that people that read it and know Rogers, Arkansas can relate to, or that know the Ozarks can relate to, both with the lifestyle and with the setting. And so it came together very nicely, and I had a great deal of fun writing it. And it was published, I guess its official day was March 30th, and it's been out now for about, well, what's that, a little over a month.
Yeah.
And sales have been pretty good, I think. I don't really keep up with them, but I get some information every now and then and I get a lot of contact from people. I read your book, when are you going to do a sequel? Or I read your book and ordered 5 for the church. And these are all very, very joyful things to hear.
Yeah,
it's especially joyful because on occasion you hear from, this has happened to me both with the first book and with the second, where I've heard from people that said this was a meaningful book to me because my faith had been challenged for this reason or that, and we had some interesting talks, and that was very nice. It was very fulfilling.
Was your main character inspired by a true life person, or is he just a conglomeration of people?
My main character was not. I mean, he had a lot of things in common with me in that the settings were places that I had been and had understood. And he enjoyed a presence of the Lord that may not have gone back to the first grade like it did for me, but it went back quite a ways in his life, and he was confident and comfortable with it, but not evangelistic by any means. It's a portrait of a fairly simple man that is just extremely honest and straightforward, and enjoys an adventure, and that's what he's in. The other characters, some are some are loosely inspired on other characters that have been in situations that I'm familiar with, but there's no real intent to try to represent any person per se. It's all fictitious. There's his best friend is probably a character that is most similar to someone that I know, and I could almost dedicate the book to him. But at any rate, they're all fictitious, and they have little pieces of lots of people that I've known, as would be typical for a writer, I guess.
I think so. So you said people asked you, are you going to write a sequel and what's next? So you have your autobiography, basically, your first one, memoir, autobiographical,
Yes.
and then you have your fiction, and you have a publisher. Are they pushing you to write more? Because usually they want more than one book.
I have gotten a little bit of I was surprised. I got a little push from a few, because it's very early in the life of the book, but I got a little bit of a push from a few that read the book that said, when are you going to do the sequel? And that was a real, as I thought back about the book, I could easily see how the story can be continued, but it wasn't my original intent. I suppose that if I could easily carry the story forward and examine some more things that I think are near and dear to me, and I may choose to do that at some point. So that's just kind of an option that's on the table.
So you're not working on anything right now, Michael? You're not working on another book at the moment? I mean, not one necessarily sequel.
I am. I have another book. I have actually 3 other stories in mind, 3 other books, if you will, if you will. One of which is, and the way I kind of do this, I don't know how authors work. All I know is how I work. And I see things, and I look at the world through a lens of, I think hopefully a Christian lens, but I look at the world through a lens of humor too, because and mostly an understanding or a desire to explore human nature, and how human nature can be funny, and how it can be inspirational, and how it can be challenging. And so the other books that I'm working on, I have some other books I'm working on, and I especially have one that I'm very fond of that is early in its development, but it's not a sequel. It's a book that, well, I really don't want to say too much about it, but I will say that it's a book that explores some of the issue about the interrelationship between men and women in a long-standing and loving relationship, and what that might look like when it occurs along the lines of how we are admonished to behave biblically. So, but again, it's not a theology book. It's just an exploration of kind of what would it look like if these people behaved thus and so.
Right. And how long did it take you to write Canaan Found? Because did you say you started it in 2017 and it came out in 2023?
No, I published my first book in 2017.
Okay.
And then I kind of didn't think about anything for about a year. And then I began to think about going into fiction. And I don't write anything down. I don't even keep notes. I just kind of form thoughts in my head. And then when I finally had in my head a framework of the entire story, I began writing, and I wrote it in 2 months.
Wow.
Maybe 2.5. And I sent it off to the publisher, the same publisher, and he said, yeah, we want to publish it. And so off we went, and I decided, well, with this book, I think I would like to market it, a little bit, get the word out there and give it some legs. And so far the response has been, like I say, it's early, but so far the response has been pretty good, getting all top reviews on Amazon, and it's available on my website, and it's available on Amazon, and it's available in Kindle form. So there's been quite a bit of activity so far.
What do you do for marketing?
Well, as I said, it's my first attempt to market. I started with simply an email list of everybody that I could that I had a direct or indirect connection with, and did a launch team email for a selected group of that. I asked a couple of people, the writers, and one a missionary and another writer, to review the book along with a couple of other key individuals. And I was kind of flabbergasted because I sent a copy of the book to the reviewers, and two of them had read it within 70 hours or something. They read it in like 2 or 3 days, and kind of surprised me because it's a 450-page book. And that was where some of the comments about sequels came about. So I was encouraged, of course. And then I did another mailing when the actual publication date came out, an expanded mailing email campaign, and then started in on these interviews, to responding to interviews that might be beneficial. I have gotten the book in a couple of bookstores that would like to keep, mostly not so much because I want it in all the bookstores, although that'd be fine, but I want it here in my hometown in Greenville, and back in the town of Rogers. It's available, and it's available in a couple of other communities in South Carolina. I want to be able to tell people. Some people call me and they say, how do I get your book? And I say, well, you can order it online. They say, how do I do that? And I say, well, you can get it on Amazon. And they say, I don't want to do that. And I said, okay, or you can get it at my website. And they say, now, what's your website? And I kind of, for some people, I like to be able to say, you know what? You can drive over to so-and-so bookstore and get it there.
Yeah. So you're dealing with some people that are not technologically savvy, I'm guessing, because they don't want to deal with website and Amazon and all that goes with it.
Well, I think people become technological savvy up to a point that it serves their immediate needs, and they don't really go beyond. And I suppose I fall into that category too, to some extent. I discover, oh, you can do that. Yeah, I'll go there. And so it's and no matter how fast you learn, the opportunities are expanding. So yeah, I think everyone's moving along the continuum of learning what to do with the technology that's available, and they're doing it at their own speed. And sometimes they're not quite ready for even my own sister wanted to get some copies of the books, and she ended up ordering it from an obscure bookstore that was an ad on Google rather than the real website. But she got the book, and that's fine. So it's been humorous, I think, to go through this process, and been quite a joy.
Yeah. Most people will ask for, nowadays it's not necessarily page count for your books, it's word count. Do you know what the word count for your book is? I'm just curious, because of the most fiction books are right around 90,000, but that's not anywhere near 450 pages.
No, I think mine, if I remember correctly, it's 129,000.
Yeah, that's a long fiction book.
Yeah, it's a long book. And I remember thinking well, my first book was, I don't know, maybe 100,000 or 90,000, something like that. I remember when I was writing it, I thought, boy, this sucker's getting kind of big.
Takes up a lot of space.
But I said, I don't care. And so far, it seems that the responses I've got are, I enjoyed your book. I read it in 3 days, or I read it in 2 days. I remember one fellow stayed up all night and finished it in like 36 hours. And give it a rest. It's not going away.
Well, people start, that's a testament to your writing. People start reading and they don't want to put it down. And if they're drawn into it, then they don't. And that's what you want. You want your readers to be so drawn into it. They don't want to put the book down, because if you can put a book down and come back to it a week later, it's not that interesting.
I know. And I'm really surprised when people order 5 or 10 books, and I say, what's going on? And they want to, well, my friends are just not savvy on the internet, and I want to be able to sell it to them. Or I want to be able to give books to people. And I'm going to have a book signing in June the 3rd. in a bookstore in Rogers, Arkansas called Brick Lane Books.
Oh,
And,
nice.
and so I'm going there in Arkansas. I have my first book signing there. And it it's looks like it might be a well attended.
I'm sure it will be. What about your in Greenville? Will you be doing some at the local bookstores there since they're carrying your book?
I haven't pursued that yet because I have to go, I have to make a trip to Dallas on, I still dabble in some architectural projects helping old clients. I'm not really practicing architecture, but I have some clients that are call me every now and then, want me to help put together something. And so I have to go to Dallas, and then I have to go back to Arkansas. And then I thought after that, I would get that first book signing under my belt, and then I would talk to the people here about maybe doing one here
Well,
as the interest grows.
so what another one of the questions I have here, which may obviously I don't think it pertains. Well, it does pertain to you because your book, you've done horseback riding, you've done some cowboying type stuff, and you're able to bring that into your book. But have you ever thought, like if I were an architect, I would certainly bring that into some of my books because I think it's a fascinating career and a lot of people don't know much about it. So you could have some really, and you have that knowledge that you don't have to research. You already have it. Have you ever thought about doing something like that?
Well, that thought's never left my mind, and I think that so far I haven't come up with a plot that would pursue the things that I'm interested in pursuing in an architectural practice setting. But it would be quite easy to do so. I also fear that I might get caught up in some minutia that nobody would remotely care about. Architects can sometimes be a little egotistical, and I don't know. In my experience, they think they're pretty smart, and sometimes they are. And so I haven't really come up with a scheme to do that, but I suspect it's bubbling around somewhere and will come out one of these days if I keep writing,
Well,
because it is.
I'm just thinking if you are, you think about building a house and you're building a foundation, you start thinking about putting a house together and creating a house as a metaphor, for our walk with Christ and how that all kind of plays in and where our foundation is and all that. So I just thought, it would be a natural progression if you wanted to do that, I would think. But I could see where you could get caught up in the minutia, as you said, because you have so much knowledge. Sometimes a lot of that is better left in the backstory, not necessarily in the upfront.
Well, the architecture is in both of my books a little bit. My first book with my story had to delve into architecture, and I did relate many interesting stories about my own personal experiences. I did a homeless shelter in Boston, and I lived as a homeless person on the streets of Boston.
Really?
With the homeless in order to understand their situation and the needs. And I gained a lot of understanding of the homeless situation in our country. I also did a prison, and so I allowed myself to be incarcerated in a medium security prison to be with prisoners and find out, their perspectives of on their environment, so I could be in a position to knowledgeably respond to that within the confines of what was allowable.
Okay, I gotta ask you. I'm gonna cut in. I gotta find out, how do you get yourself incarcerated?
Well, it was a medium security prison of 440 inmates that the firm that at the time, this was before I had started my own firm. I was a director of architecture in another firm. And it was a prison that the firm had done, and it was a very good prison. I guess it was a very well respected prison. But it was interesting because the prisoners, it was a medium security prison, but everyone plea bargains so they don't have to go to what's called the big house.
Right.
And so this medium security prison was half murderers and violent drug offenders and violent sex offenders. So it was a little bit at odds with its mission. And we were going to be asked to do some things that I thought might be problematic under the what they call the consent decrees and some of the federal guidelines. And so the only way I could get a firsthand look was to go to the warden and say, can I check into your prison and stay a while? And he thought I was nuts.
Oh, yeah.
But when I talked to him, he realized that the story that I might gain, the information I might gain, might greatly help what he considered to be quite an onerous task coming up. And so he allowed me in, and I had a roommate. I had a person that showed me around, and he was a really big guy, about 300 and some odd pounds, a violent sex offender that was in for murder. And he was extremely nice. I thought, wow, this is a funny choice. But then I saw the wisdom of the warden, because this guy was really looked out for me.
Right.
And I was, as long as I was honest, and this goes across so many channels, as long as I was honest about what I was doing, I was well received. And they have a real good meter built in to recognize BS.
Right.
And so I told him I was an architect and I was there, and we were going to design some things, and there was going to be a new chapel, and there was going to be some recreation facilities, and there was going to be some changes to their lodging, and I wanted to get their input, and I got it. And it was an interesting experience. Same thing can be said for the homeless. I learned so much about the homeless. It's totally contrary to what a lot of people believe. And, we've had homeless people for 4,000 years, and we probably always will. And so, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't deal with them and help them. And so I did a 300-person homeless shelter in Boston, and had to learn what it was like to be homeless and live on the streets. It was really eye-opening.
Well, it's obvious you take your profession seriously, and you get right into it, and the research for what you're doing. And I think that's very commendable. And I could see where it would really add a lot to books that you might write if you were to do the same thing. We're running out of time, but you have got, I could go on forever, because you've got so many fascinating stories. And, just the prison thing. I recently toured a maximum security prison myself for a class that I'm taking. And it was pretty eye-opening. And you see these people, and they're human. They're human that
Sure.
made some really bad choices, and some of them are there forever, and it's really heartbreaking. So it just opens your eyes to a whole different situation. You might not otherwise even think about it. I think I commend you for doing that, and for the homeless as well, and all that. I'm hoping, Michael, that you're going to give us another book here pretty soon. It sounds like, you're able to take your time. My publisher has me doing 3 books a year. I can't imagine being able to just go, oh, wait a while and maybe figure it out. It doesn't work that way sometimes. So you're blessed to have a publisher who's just laid back like they are. So good for you.
Well, I suppose on some level, I think, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if they pressured me? But on the other hand, I don't need that. And so I do anticipate that if as I continue to write, the pace might pick up a little bit, because I've got 3 books in my head right now, and I know that I'm going to have to get them down sooner or later. I'm
sure you will. So it's been a real pleasure meeting with you today. I'm so glad that you allowed us to interview you, and I look forward to it. I'm going to put all of your information in the show notes. We'll have your links to your book. We'll have your link to your website, and you be sure and send me anything else you might want on there, and I'll put it in there as well. So this will actually publish on, we said July 20th. For those of you, I've said this before, whenever we're doing one of these, we did a podcast interview, and it was at Christmas time, but it wasn't publishing for a couple of months, so it throws people off. So we're right here in the smack middle of May right now. So actually May 15th. So by the time this comes out, it'll be a couple months. So we look forward to, I hope it's a blessing to you, Michael, and I appreciate you hanging out with me for a little while.
You bet. I enjoyed it immensely. I really did.
Well, it's been nice, and hope you all out there are doing well, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Okay. Thank you very much.